Good afternoon. The subcommittee will come to order. I would like to welcome each of you to the hearing of the Readiness Subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee on the new Army Futures Command. Today, the subcommittee will hear from the Undersecretary of the Army and the Commander of the Army Futures Command about the reasons the Army decided to establish a new major command, the most significant restructuring of the institutional Army since the 1970s. Because this new entity will work within the existing Army structure, the subcommittee will be interested in learning how the Army Futures Command will work with other important players in the Army modernization process. Relationships with the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology, as well as those with the Army's Materiel Command and the Training and Doctrine Command, will be critical. Indeed, it's difficult to envision how all these changes will synchronize in a smooth fashion. We recognize that the Army's intent is to improve and speed the modernization process. As you're aware, acquisition improvement across the Department of Defense has been a committee focus for a long time, though discernible change is elusive. We also are eager to understand how the Army intends to overcome the obstacles to improvement that have frustrated so many who have tried to overcome them. While I'm hopeful, I'm not yet persuaded that a new command is the right answer to the Army's acquisition challenges. We welcome the witnesses' perspective on these issues and any recommendations you may have. Before I introduce the witnesses, I turn to the extraordinarily distinguished ranking member of the Readiness Subcommittee, the gentlelady and wonderful individual from the beautiful territory of Guam, Madeline Badallo, for her opening comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Your introductions get better by the day. And thank you to our witnesses for being here to discuss the establishment of the Army's newest four-star command, Army Futures Command. And I want to congratulate the General on his appointment. Up to this point, much of the focus and attention has been placed on the selection of the Army Futures Command headquarters. And I understand that the department has selected Austin, Texas, and I know some members may still have questions about the process and the metrics used to make the final stationing decision. Aside from location, as the Army proceeds with standing up Futures Command, the committee has questions on the roles and the mission of this new command. The Army has faced multiple challenges with its efforts to modernize and rebuild the service's full-spectrum readiness. Furthermore, the Army's past attempts to change internal policies, command relationships, and organizational structures in an effort to improve the acquisition process has met mixed results. So I look forward to hearing how you believe it will be different this time. And I hope you will also address three areas of concern. First is the risk of creating another massive bureaucracy. Second is duplicating the role of the Army staff. And third is the long-term risk to civilian control of the acquisition system. With regard to the bureaucracy concern, while I know the intention is to keep this new four-star command small, history shows that over time, all such commands grow rapidly. No matter who is in charge, large administrative commands like this often develop internal processes that consume vast amounts of time and resources. So in creating yet another large organization, I think it is fair to ask if the Army is in fact just creating more overhead that will further slow an already cumbersome process. Secondly, many of the functions that the Army Futures Command is expected to address are already being performed somewhere else on the Army staff. And I'm concerned that the Army is standing up a four-star organization with up to 3 lieutenant generals as deputies, without a clearly defined command relationship and an organizational plan. I understand that as the Army separates staff roles and responsibilities, there may be a period of redundancy and inefficiency. However, I look forward to hearing your plan to mitigate these inefficiencies. And finally, I hope you will address how civilian oversight of the acquisition system will be maintained with this new command. In my view, the law is clear that the acquisition chain of command runs from program managers through the Civilian Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology, who derives his authority from the Secretary of the Army. While the proposed structure appears to be consistent with the letter of the law, I am concerned that it comes close to violating the spirit of the law in that over time, the civilian acquisition leadership will be eclipsed by the size and the weight of this new organization, run entirely by general officers. So I'd like to hear today about how such a loss of civilian authority and control will be avoided. As the Army has noted, the establishment of the Futures Command is a significant undertaking and a reorganization plan. And like with any major organizational change, I'm sure there will be challenges as the command is stood up and begins to influence decisions affecting modernization and readiness. I support the Army's efforts to improve the acquisition process. However, it is our responsibility today to ask hard questions, especially while we're early in the development. I look forward to your comments, and we're working with you toward a successful conclusion. And I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing, and I yield back.
And thank you very much, Congressman Badallo. We always appreciate your tireless service. I am pleased to recognize our witnesses today. I would like to thank them for taking the time to be with us. They are the Honorable Ryan McCarthy, the Undersecretary of the Army, and General John M. Murray, Commanding General, U.S. Army Futures Command. Before we begin, I'd like to remind the witnesses that your full written statements have been submitted for the record, and we ask you summarize your comments to 5 minutes or less. Secretary McCarthy, we'd like to begin with you, and we look forward to your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Badallo, and distinguished members of this subcommittee and staff. I appreciate this hearing's acknowledgement of the importance and gravity of the Army's establishment of Futures Command and the impact it will have on our force. First, I want to personally thank each of you for the 2-year defense budget top-line increase of $22.5 billion this past year. This generous amount in support has primed the pump to re-energize our Army's modernization efforts. Your confidence in our ability to maximize the utility of every dollar is not lost on us. Today, I, alongside General Mike Murray, look forward to sharing why the Army is reorganizing, how the Army is institutionalizing a governance structure to transcend personalities, and how the Army is establishing relationships to ensure modernization of our formations. Dr. Esper and General Milley testified in April on the changing nature of warfare, increasing adversarial capabilities, and how the Army is meeting the National Defense Strategy requirements. This reason underpins our reorganization and the establishment of Army Futures Command. We looked across the entire Army enterprise to put all modernization tasks that generate a warfighting capability under one roof. These tasks include warfighting concepts, requirements, experimentation, and fielding of materiel and non-materiel solutions. By design, this is not your normal Army command. It can't be. To thrive in the information age, we must operate in a fast-paced, dynamic, and evolving ecosystem. We will become comfortable being uncomfortable by partnering with non-traditional actors, operating with a lean organizational design, and sharing a connection to academia and industry that we have never achieved before. This change enables us to address problem solving differently and gain accurate customer feedback by incorporating the best of Army warfighters with the best of American academia and industry. We are confident that Army Futures Command will address our past modernization shortcomings. This command will now drive accountability, provide agility in solution generation, and produce results, ultimately bridging the future and the fielded force. This command will be painstakingly focused on the future fight. We are ensuring the lethality and survivability of our soldiers and the continued preeminence of our Army as the world's premier land fighting force. With the help of industry, academia, and Congress, we can produce what our soldiers need. 2 months ago, we selected Austin, Texas as the headquarters of Futures Command. Austin provides the necessary mix of STEM, R&D investment, a mature incubator ecosystem, a top-tier university system to partner with, and a disruptive and welcoming culture that propels a vertical integration of our concepts through solutions, all within a few city blocks. We couldn't be happier with the reception and support from the City of Austin, the University of Texas, and the State of Texas. Recently, I was asked by the Governor of Texas what success looked like and how I would know we made the right decision in 10 years. I told him the answer is simple. We'll have next-generation capabilities in the hand of our soldiers in the next 3 to 5 years, as that is the only metric that matters. Congressional support has provided the blueprint and resourcing for this endeavor, and we must produce the results that your trust requires. Anything less is not acceptable to the current Army leadership, to this committee, or the citizens of this country. We appreciate your unrelenting support and acknowledge the work remaining. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Secretary MacArthur. We now proceed, General Murray, with your opening statement.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Bordillo, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. The world has changed significantly since our current ground combat systems were designed and built in the 1970s and 1980s. The rapid pace of technological change, coupled with the speed of innovation we see in the world today, demand that the Army makes changes in the way we develop and deliver concepts and capability for our soldiers. I fully understand the weight of responsibility that now rests on my shoulders and accept that responsibility without hesitation. The stakes could simply not be higher. I am personally and professionally invested to ensure the future soldiers have the concepts and capabilities they need when and where they need them to fight and win on a future highly lethal battlefield. We simply must change our linear, sequential modernization process to create a flexible, agile, and innovative organization that adapts to a rapidly changing world and evolving threat. This command will provide more than oversight on cost, schedule, and performance. It must also provide value. Value to the American people, value to Congress, value to the Joint Force, value to our Army, and, most importantly, value to the young men and women that will be defending our ideals and freedoms on a future battlefield. I have 4 initial priorities to ensure the Army Futures Command succeeds. First is to recruit, hire, and in place talent throughout the organization. We are being very deliberate about aligning the right mix of talent, both military and civilian, against the complex problems the Army must solve. Second, build relationships and establish our footprint within Austin's entrepreneurs, incubators, university system, and private industries. This is what led our leaders to selection of Austin, and we must harness what the city has to offer. As our command gets established, we will start seeking to put small footprints into other incubator hubs across the U.S. to gain access to as much of America's talent as we possibly can. Third, embrace the culture we need within our organization to transform from the industrial age to the speed of the information age. When you visit us in Austin, you will not see us in uniforms. What you will see is us operating out of a high-rise, integrating on a daily basis with entrepreneurs, scientists, and businesses. We will employ the entrepreneurial spirit of accepting the risk of failure early and cheaply in order to create the best solutions for our soldiers. Fourth, integrate Army organizations and missions. I understand that change is hard. It will be disruptive. And building the team from existing organizations dispersed across the United States will take leadership and patience. This is not about success of any one organization or individual. It is about delivering concepts and capabilities that ensure our soldiers and formations have overmatch on a future battlefield. We must stay focused on output. Last October, we stood up 8 cross-functional teams, or CFTs, aligned with the Army's 6 modernization priorities. In less than 12 months, the CFTs have validated our approach and produced solutions that will be rapidly delivered to our soldiers, in most cases cutting the traditional requirements and acquisition process in half or better. Given sufficient resources and time, Army Futures Command and the CFTs will continue to produce similar results. It is those results that will ensure the Army retains overmatch, is ready for multi-domain operations, and most importantly, will ensure our soldiers are ready to deploy, fight, and win on a future battlefield. Let me close by saying we cannot succeed without congressional support. It is absolutely essential. I look forward to all of you visiting us in Austin and providing you updates on our progress on a routine basis. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, General Murray. For the benefit of each member of the subcommittee, we will adhere to the 5-minute rule for questions to the witnesses and I appreciate the 5-minute rule will be strictly administered by professional staff member Tom Hawley. And we begin with me under the 5-minute rule. Secretary McCarthy, as you are aware, Title 10 vests responsibility for the acquisition and budgeting to Senate-confirmed civilian officials in the Department of the Army. Given these restrictions, will the Army Futures Command have the authorities necessary to carry out its mission? On the other hand, are you concerned that the Secretary of the Army and Assistant Secretaries will lose visibility of programs they remain accountable for?
No, sir.
Gosh, that's,
Sorry. No, we're not concerned, sir.
well, hey, we appreciate the succinct response. That was clearly understood. And in fact, the next question, I think you may have answered that too, before I get to it, and that is, are there any further legislative initiatives that are needed by anyone here to back up your efforts?
Not at this juncture, sir, no.
And thank you very much. And General Murray, can you describe how you will ensure your command will work with the Army Materiel Command and the Training and Doctrine Command? How will you ensure that the work of your command has influence in the annual program and budget cycle? How will you interact with that process? And your record of service is encouraging that somehow all of these challenges are going to be met.
Yes, sir. So it's simply what I said in my opening statement is none of us, whether it's TRADOC, AMC, or Army Futures Command, or FORSCOM, can be successful if we stay focused on output for our soldiers, delivering value to young men and women that fight our battles. And so that is how you stay unified. And it's just not those organizations. It's also, as you mentioned, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. So relationships will be exceptionally important and going forward. And I think as long as all of us remain focused on what we deliver to our soldiers, that's how you get to success.
And a concern that we've all had is to be able to change to the rapidly ever-changing technology. Do you feel like this can be achieved?
I do, sir, because we're going to rely not only on our traditional lab system, which we will continue to rely upon, but we're going to open our eyes to technologies that we didn't even know existed. So we're going to get out and we're going to find disruptive technologies that can either be incorporated directly through the acquisition executive or through our lab system.
And Secretary McCarthy, you've already really addressed this too. You're ahead of the curve. And that is the unique placement of all places, Austin, Texas. And can you go through that again as to what were the determining factors of locating at Austin?
Sir, we started the process about 8 or 9 months ago where we got an outside firm to assist us in developing a quantifiable formula that had characteristics like STEM talent, R&D investment, density of entrepreneurs, skill sets like systems engineering, software development, and looked at the densities associated where these skills lied in the country. Also had accessibility. How fast could we assume the location, our position in that ecosystem, as well as the cost of living. So we started with 150 cities, narrowed it down all the way to 5. And then I personally went on to the due diligence visits. And then ultimately it came out that Austin scored the highest of the 5 cities that were our finalists, sir.
Thank you very much. And General Murray, I think the American people would be interested in learning of the location of your command, which is quite unique.
Yes, sir. It's on the 19th floor of the University of Texas Systems Building. It currently is concrete floor, concrete pillars, and overhead water pipes that will be built out over the next 6 months, right smack in the middle of downtown Austin, with a small cell operating in a place called the Capital Factory, which is an accelerator hub.
Well, we all think of military facilities as extraordinary acreage, and so to find out the centralized nature of what you're doing, it shows vision, and I want to commend you. And thank both of you, and we now proceed to Congresswoman Bardillo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I hope you don't extract this from my 5 minutes. But there's a native of Guam in the audience today, and I'm very proud of her. She is the military assistant to the Undersecretary of the Army, Mr. McCarthy. And she's seated right over there, Major Umpinko. Would you raise your hand? You're a little bit short. Stand up, stand up.
Major, thank you for being here. And that shall not be counted against.
May I correct the record, sir? She's a lieutenant colonel promotable.
Here, here.
Oh, all right, all right. And her father was the Speaker of the Guam Legislature for many years, and I served as a senator under his leadership. So welcome to you, Mr. All right, my question. Now we're starting the time, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Now you can begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for either witness. Given the rapid timeline for standing up this huge and complex organization that is expected to be fully operational by the summer of 2019, is that correct? How are you going to measure success and progress, and more importantly, what is your plan if you are not seeing any value added?
So, ma'am, and like I said in my opening statement, the ultimate value is a value to the soldier. And so that's how we will ultimately measure output. There are, the organization will build between now and about March is when I pick up my last organization, then fully operational in July 31st is the target date. I'm currently working specific metrics in terms of the amount of time it takes us to deliver capability. But like I said earlier, I think ultimately you'll be able to measure the value of this organization. The ultimate metric is soldiers on the battlefield being able to utilize the equipment and the concepts we'll produce.
And Secretary McCarthy, do you?
If I may add, ma'am, the work really began about 3 years ago, and it really started with a conversation between Senator McCain and General Milley right before his confirmation hearing. And his point of emphasis was that the Army needed to reorganize itself so that it could bring stakeholders together and move faster in this process, reduce the span time, get better informed decisions. So the work really began then with Lieutenant General Murray and Major General Jimmy Richardson, who was just recently promoted to 3 stars as his deputy. So a lot of the work had been done over about a 2-year horizon, and then timing worked out with this current leadership team's buy-in, and really found another gear last fall when we made the announcement to pursue this. So a lot of rigor and energy applied over a 3-year horizon.
Thank you. This next question is also for either witness. In creating Army Futures Command, the Army is taking major elements out of 2 existing 4-star commands, Army Training and Doctrine Command and the Army Sustainment Command. So since these organizations are getting smaller, have the Army leaders considered making these commands 3-star commands in order to reduce overall administrative overhead?
Ma'am, what we believe as the Army Senior Leadership Team is that it's provide much greater clarity and focus for all of our major commands. So training and doctrine focuses, hones in on assessing individuals and preparing them to send them to the operational force. FORCECOM, laser focus on readiness. And with AMC, by taking out that S&T, that Research and Development Organization, they look solely at the sustaining of the force. The power of the RDE-COM is really part of the nucleus that's behind the Futures Command. So we see greater focus within the major commands, and we know it will improve performance.
Right. And I have one final question, Mr. Chairman. Under Secretary McCarthy, I understand that the 3-star deputy to the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology will be answering in some capacity to both the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology and the Commander of the Army Futures Command. So in my experience, answering to 2 bosses has never been very successful. I expect that at some point there will be diverging instructions or conflicts. Who will be the honest broker to ensure that civilian oversight for acquisition retains its lawful integrity without overriding the commander's authorities?
Ma'am, the purpose behind General Ostrowski's role as the MILDEP for ASALT being tied into the command is so that he can perform the oversight and management of the program managers that are matrixed into the command. They receive all of their instructions from Dr. Jetty, but this brings the acquisition community closer to requirements and our intent of improving planning, programming, budgeting, and execution. So this is an organizational format to bring us closer together so we can perform better.
All right.
But his instructions are from Dr. Jetty.
You feel the same way, General?
Absolutely, ma'am. So I see General Ostrowski as my primary acquisition advisor.
Thank you. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Badalio. Mr. Secretary, you answered Chairman Wilson's question pretty succinctly with a no a minute ago. Now, I want to go back to one of the things that I think a lot of us have concerns about is whether or not there will be challenges in harmonizing the authorities within retaining Army Material Command, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, Technology, and the stand-up of Army's Future Command. You don't see any, do you see any difficulties in the harmonization between the three?
Yes, sir. There'll be cultural challenges. We have decades of ingrained behavior, so that like all things, this will require a great deal of senior leadership focus, as well as in communication internally and externally to stakeholders.
Just briefly, how do you see a day in Army's Future Command? I mean, from start to finish. Can you walk us through how, or General, you expect a day or a week or a month?
I don't know that I can walk you through a time period, but I can talk you through what my priorities will be from the headquarters location. Sure. And it's really just the synchronization of efforts across the entire modernization enterprise and ensuring that that enterprise is focused on what's most important to the Army. A lot of that's going to have to be worked through Dr. Jetty as the Army Acquisition Executive. I think I have oversight of the entire acquisition process, so really from a beginning of a requirement through the divestiture of a piece of equipment, but I don't have authorities across that spectrum. So maintaining one person with oversight that can point out opportunities and arising problems so they can be solved quickly by whoever's responsible for that piece of it, I think is one of my primary roles. And then synchronization, integration, and I would almost use the word orchestration of the entire force modernization effort.
So some things would seem pretty simple, like the selection and purchase of a new pistol. Other things are more complex. You know, what type of system replaces something like an Apache? Will you deal with the simple issues as well as the complex issues? Will something like a pistol or a rifle purchase come through your command, or will that be left?
I think it depends on whether it's a future capability or a near-term capability, sir. So I doubt that whatever replaces the new pistol would come through my command, but I am focused on next-generation squad automatic rifle and next-generation squad weapon. So if it's the next evolution or the revolutionary breakthrough that the CFTs are focused on, but I expect that I will remain focused primarily on the Army's priorities.
I think most of my questions have been answered, so I'll yield the remainder of my time and recognize Mr. Courtney for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, both witnesses, for being here today. You know, the Army, I think I get the logic and the intent of this initiative. The Army has struggled over the years in terms of new acquisition programs, just and a lot of times it plays out in front of this committee. You know, the Future Combat Systems program, which I think was terminated by Secretary Gates, the ground combat vehicle, which I think was terminated by Secretary Hagel. Again, the demise of those programs were something that the Armed Services Committee, and particularly subcommittees like Readiness, were sort of had front row seats while that was all sort of going. So I think that what you're trying to do, which is to reset the whole approach here in terms of acquisition, certainly makes a lot of sense. I guess, what I would be curious to hear is that if, this subcommittee 2 years from now held a hearing on, sort of before and after standing up, what would be the matrix? What metrics rather, in terms of, what are we gonna see happen in 2 years that would really be, again, a measuring stick so that we could see that real change is occurring here in a positive. And again, I would open that to either one of you or both.
Sir, you've probably read this in a couple articles. I can't do miracles, so I'm not going to deliver you a new tank in 2 years. But what I do think you will see is some of the capabilities the cross-functional teams are working on will will be in production and being delivered in the hands of soldiers within the next 2 years. Not all of them, but a couple key pieces of it. And I do think that you will see a very deliberate effort to align, synchronize, and orchestrate across the entire modernization effort, and I think you will see much shorter timelines to deliver capability to soldiers.
Yes, sir. The very similar vein to what General Murray described is that we will be able to show you the span time reduction in requirements, development, and then moving towards experimentation and prototyping of the performance of for procurement of weapon systems. Very similar to the way manufacturing institutions measure return on invested capital, the speed in which and the performance at which you can put together a concept.
So, I mean, I'm not proposing that, you should just do stuff for the sake of doing stuff, but I mean, you do sort of visualize that 2 years from now, you'll be able to present, again, a real concrete sort of timelines for, and particularly priorities that you've identified for the command?
Yes, sir.
That's it.
Yes, sir.
Good. All right, well, who knows, we'll be around 2 years from now, but I'm sure, again, this subcommittee will be certainly very anxious to sort of watch if we've sort of figured out, a solution to what's, again, been an unfortunate time for the Army over the last few years. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Russell, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's great to have the Undersecretary here today and General Murray. And if I may, to my colleagues on the committee, you couldn't have a finer person in charge of this command. I've known General Murray since we were both captains. I served with him at Fort Irwin, Fort Benning, Fort Hood. We had overlap in operational combat deployments to Iraq and also in the initial entry forces into Kosovo. We were even on the Army's 50th anniversary dozen soldiers that were picked to do that commemoration team. We served together in Schweinfurt and Fort Hood. I know this general that sits before you, and he is a warrior. He is not a logistician that can't identify the muzzle end of a rifle or something of that nature. Not that we don't love our logisticians, we do. But I'm speaking as an infantryman, so forgive me there. We often say nothing's too good for the troops, and nothing is pretty much what we've given them since the 1980s. And all of the things that we were able to deliver to our forces in the 1980s and early 1990s were a result of technologies that were developed in the 70s. And if I might opine, I don't share the pessimism that some may share on our panel today. I actually have optimism for it. Because if you look at where our acquisition process has been, we have a long line of almost Hall of Fame type failures to show for what has not worked in the last 30 years. Future Combat System, Crusader, Comanche, Land Warrior, melting plastic rifles at Fort Benning that we almost adopted, and thank God we didn't. One bright spot was FBCB2 and Force 21, which really only came into its own when that was turned over to field commands and they made it work. And then we used it in time of war. And the same could be said for the soldiers' support, things like communications, UAV, night and thermal fusion. But that was largely driven by the Special Operations Forces community that circumvented these traditional non-working acquisition processes. So ground truth's closest to the ground. And my own opinion on this is the warriors know what they need. And this is an approach to try to get at it. And I applaud both the Secretary of the Army and Undersecretary, General Milley, others that have taken this bold move. When we've seen the best developments in this age of information, it's coming out of places like DIUX, SoftWorks, other things that circumvent an archaic, divided system that doesn't work. So we have to try something new. Otherwise, we will continue to fight in 1970s technologies well into 2050, and we can't afford to do that. But right now, that's what our soldiers have. So I'll get off of my soapbox a little bit on that. But I I'm actually quite optimistic, but my blood type is B positive, so it's in my DNA. So I would like to ask, General Murray, you laid out the four priorities: recruit the best talent, build the relationship with incubators and educators, embrace the culture from the industrial age to the informational age. I think that's a really key one. And then the integrating the Army organization and missions. A lot of the concern from this panel seems to be on that last one, on the integration. But describe your colleagues' reaction to it in the other four-star commands. And by the way, I want to congratulate you again on a promotion to your fourth star in your command. But describe that relationship and the reaction to it from the field.
Thank you, sir. Start with the reaction first. So I have full support from the other four-star ACOM commanders. I was on the phone with General Perna from AMC last night. And as you would imagine, with a 2-year budgeting cycle, the money's going to be a little flaky for the first couple of years, and that's specifically what we talked about. And he pledged to me that he would support my priorities, even though he's administering the funds. Sat with General Abrams from FORSCOM a couple of days ago. What I asked from him was basically what you described: is I need a partner so I can get soldier input and prototypes into the hands of soldiers, so we can deliver what is important to soldiers first and focus on that. And then General Townsend at TRADOC, obviously I'm picking up a part of his organization. I have a free and open invitation to start work that I really pick up next summer from General Townsend. So the relationship has been exceptionally positive.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Secretary, is there anything that, I mean, the OSD side of the five-sided building can often be almost contrary to the operational side. And so how are you maneuvering these political realities with the need to build the future as you're trying to weave your own battles through there?
Sir, as an alumnus of OSD, I'm fully aware of what you mentioned. A lot of that is just the engagement. It's the investment of time of going up and down the E-ring and meeting with my teammates. A lot of the authorities that have been delivered by this committee have really reset the balance so that the services do manage a lot more major defense acquisition programs than we have in the last couple decades. Things, like all things, it takes engagement and just a lot of effort on a daily basis, sir.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Russell. We now proceed to Congressman Salud Carbajal of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Undersecretary McCarthy and General Murray, for being here today. The purpose of the Army's Futures Command is to streamline modernization efforts in order to get new technology and equipment to the soldiers quicker. The creation of this new command is a result of significant failures involving major combat systems and the growing concern that the U.S. is falling behind its adversaries, such as Russia and China, when it comes to our capabilities. It is also a solution that could potentially address the notorious complaint that it just takes too long to do business with the military. I think General Milley explains it best. Quote, "What we have is essentially a linear process, going from an idea, writing up a big requirements document, and then vetting it through multiple steps. It takes years, and it's not going to be effective going into the future. The whole idea behind this new command is to develop a system where we can ask questions and change requirements at the front end of the process, so that if we're going to fail, we fail early and fail cheap, as Secretary Esper would put it. Secretary McCarthy and General Murray, I would like to get a better understanding of how the current linear process will be changed. What improvements and changes should industry expect to see, and when, as they begin working with the Futures Command?"
Sir, if you look at the formation of the cross-functional teams, and this is really the strongest element of the command, is you have a single belly button, if you will, point of entry to a portfolio, long-range precision fires, for example. So as a vendor, they go into one place and they can talk to all of the stakeholders associated with the process. This team of teams concept brings a requirements leader with a program manager, sustainer, tester, all of those key stakeholders together, formalizes the relationships why it had taken 20 years to field weapon systems is the span time of moving from desk to desk, which historically these various stakeholders were in major commands, headquarters, Department of the Army, spread across a 1 million-person organization. Now we're bringing them all together and reducing that time it takes to move information, but also the clarity. If you know this teammate, you can work the trade-offs in real time between cost, schedule, and performance. Our initial feedback from industry is they're very encouraged by this. They can go to one place and they can work through the various issues associated with an RFP, better understand the requirement that we intend to put on an RFP. So it's created better relationships, but really more so than anything has improved the timelines it takes to move information and formalize these teams to work better together.
Yes, sir, and I would just add, so you mentioned requirements documents, so a part of this is experimenting, prototyping, putting in the hands of soldiers, getting soldier feedback, involving a cross-functional team, scientists, testers, program managers, operators, to make sure that we understand what's possible before we write a requirements document. That's what's led us to failure in the past sometimes, is we would write a requirement that was not feasible, or it would take years and years to test, or it was just unaffordable. So costers are also part of this. And then I just echo what the Secretary said in terms of what the CFTs, the cross-functional teams, are showing us. So for instance, in air and missile defense, we needed a mobile, we call it SHORAD, short-range air defense, to keep up with our maneuver brigades. The initial estimate was we could field one in 25. We're now down to 4 battalions by FY20. The requirements process for that was done in 90 days as opposed to the 3 to 5 years it was taken 2 to 3 years ago. So I think there's some examples out there that we can then tie into to really how this is going to work.
Just to follow up, coming from local government, we call that concept one-stop shop. But let me ask you, what is the timing? When I hear what you're telling us, but as we know, the DoD is notorious for saying that and characterizing this great concept. But if somebody's watching this hearing and it's going to be on the receiving end, the other end of procurement, when are you going to start implementing these systems?
Sir, we've already begun with the cross-functional teams that we piloted last fall that are managing these 6 portfolio of capabilities.
If I could go over just a little bit, Mr. Chairman.
Briefly, please.
Yes, sir. So, and I think the key thing is with the relationships we talked about earlier. These are led by former brigade commanders, so these are coming out of armor and infantry brigades. There's a PM on their team, and a relationship from that PM back to the acquisition channels has proven to be very, very solid.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Carbajal. We now proceed to Congressman Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And General Murray, we would gladly accept any stories you have about our colleague here, having served with him for so long. Particularly afterwards, if you want to meet, I'll gladly receive those. Thank you for being here today for what's a really interesting discussion. Just quickly, are all the cross-functional teams, they will be housed physically together in Austin on a day-to-day basis?
No, sir. They are spread out all over the country. And
Yeah.
it's, our long-range precision fires are located at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. The ground combat vehicle is at Automotive Research Development Command in Warren, Michigan. The Future Vertical Lift is in Huntsville, Alabama. Our network is in Aberdeen Proving Ground. Missile defense is at Fort Sill, and the soldier lethality is at Fort Benning, Georgia. We have 2 complementary efforts: position navigation and timing, and synthetic training environment. The synthetic training environment's in Orlando, Florida, with the PEO STRI, and the PNT, our position navigation timing, is also at Huntsville.
And then how many personnel will be physically present in Austin? And then what will be sort of the effort to sort of bring people together on a routine basis if the cross-functional teams are sort of the heart of this effort, right?
Yes, sir. They were initially, and I have to pass on your offer. He's got more stories on me than I've got on him.
It's mutually assured destruction, I would imagine, yeah.
So the real function, and it will end up being a fairly large organization when you look at what is now RDECOM at Aberdeen Proving Ground, part of ARCIC, which is at Fort Eustis, Virginia, plus the cross-functional teams. The headquarters in Austin is capped at 500. My goal is to keep it below 500, and even with contractors, not grow it much above that. And you really unify, I think, and I think that's the key premise we're trying to get at, is these various stovepipes in the past had no central oversight, had no central person kind of establishing priorities, creating visions, driving discipline and accountability in the system, and that's the role the headquarters in Austin will play.
And I'm sorry to be obtuse about this, but so who is the belly button that the cross-functional teams loop into within just the team that is in Austin?
They link directly to my one and only deputy commander, Jim Richardson, and ultimately to me.
Got it. And then obviously, sort of TRADOC is probably losing the most responsibility in this reorganization, particularly when it comes to material and equipment planning. And if you look at the history of military innovation, successful militaries are not just those that acquire new technologies first, they're the ones that incorporate those new technologies into their doctrine, which in some ways is just as difficult, right? So could you walk me through your process a bit to understand how ultimately you decided that it would be best to split these TRADOC functions across commands?
So I think what you're referring to, sir, is, and I'm sure you're familiar with the term, we call it .mil-PF, so the integration of doctrine, training, leader development, materiel. There is a defined handoff between Army Futures Command and TRADOC, who remains responsible for that .mil-PF integration. So what I will focus on is the future operational environment. What would a battlefield look like in 2035? I'm just picking that year. Is it in a major city? Where could it possibly be? What focus do we want? What peer competitor do we want to focus on to develop concepts, organizational structures, to identify gaps that can either be modified through doctrine, organization, TTPs, in some cases materiel. Everything other than materiel gets handed off to TRADOC at about just outside, let's just call it just outside the FIDEP, to do that integration along with the concepts and requirements for the material solutions. Now, the material solutions themselves ultimately get handed off to the acquisition community and ASALT to deliver the materiel. So what I'm really delivering is concepts, organizational structures, and material solutions to be integrated by TRADOC.
Yeah. And then just to end, as my time is running out, where I began, the reason I'm asking sort of simplistic questions about physical presence is it seems like we're placing a huge bet on the necessity of being in physical proximity to an innovative culture, right? I mean, that's the whole reason for relocating to Austin and entailing some cost therein. I guess I just would have some concern that given the importance of the cross-functional teams, if we're still operating a scenario in which those are spread all across the United States and only sort of on a loose or semi-routine basis coming back to the heart of the effort in Austin, are we really achieving that sort of synergy that comes from physical presence? Because I quite agree, I think there is some value to sort of being near ideas and discussions that don't often happen within the Pentagon or at Fort Eustis or wherever. And so, I don't know, Mr. McCarthy, you just want to briefly address that concern.
It could be potentially a concern, sir, but what we see with the value of the command group being in an ecosystem like that of Austin is that we can tap into a lot of commercial technologies that have not really been afforded to the Department of Defense in recent years, and forge our relationships with academia and business and improve our ability to do business with them. The incorporation of the CFTs is to get them as close as we can to all of the elements of .mil-PF as well as the program management, and it's dependent upon the life cycle as well.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you, Congressman Gallagher. We now proceed to Congressman Anthony Brown of Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the Secretary and the General for being here today. Mr. Secretary, looking forward to our visit to Aberdeen Proving Ground next week. My question has to do with funding. So Maryland is home of two significant research development, testing, and evaluation activities. Aberdeen Proving Ground, got the networking cross-functional team, and then the Delphi, the Army Research Lab at Adelphi. The cross-functional teams, as I understand it, are supervised by the Army Futures Command. There's some other reporting that happens to other, at least directorates or commands, but you're supervising the cross-functional teams. It's my understanding that the cross-functional teams within that RD-T&E budget get their funding from the Advanced Technology Development accounts. The Army Research Lab which is basic and applied research, get their funding from those accounts. So my concern is, how are we going to fund the CFTs, and will that funding come at the expense of funding for basic and applied research?
So first answer is, sir, yes, the CFTs report directly to me, and only for the last 3 weeks. Prior to that, a lot of the success I credit to Mr. McCarthy and the Vice Chief of Staff, General McConville, was they had direct access to senior leader decision makers. So they were not going through layer after layer after layer of bureaucracy to get a decision, and that contributed a lot. And that's what we're trying to replicate with a direct report to me. Obviously, the chief, the secretary, the under, and the vice still have access to them, and we'll get periodic updates. To answer your question on the basic science monies that the Army has versus the more traditional research development monies, there will be no impact to the basic science monies. What I'm counting on ARL and other labs to produce, basic science labs to produce, is the future technologies that will be incorporated by the labs and CFTs at some point in the future.
So just to clarify, you don't see the funding for the CFTs impacting the funding for basic and applied research?
We have been very, very consistent in maintaining our funding in basic and research and applied research for many, many years, and we see the value of maintaining that funding, because what that really addresses is the breakthroughs and the knowledge we're going to need 20 years from now.
Agreed. My next question is a follow-up to Congresswoman Bordallo regarding how do you measure success. You mentioned value to the warfighters. You said that you're developing metrics. So it seems to me that you're not able to put a finer point on that now, and I appreciate that. But can you at least characterize what those metrics might look like? You know, a year from now, 5 years from now, you know, what are some of the things that you're looking at that, you know, when you talk about value to the warfighters, what those metrics might look like?
In terms of value to the warfighters, I think that's going to be a very hard one to put metrics against. And I think we're going to get a lot of that back from soldier input. So once we deliver, we have a history of delivering a capability after a 3 to 5 year requirements process, a 10-year development process. We have a history of delivering, even the programs were successful, something that is almost obsolete by the time it's delivered. And you get the most response from soldiers is, this is nice, but I've seen so much better in many other places. So I think, you know, that direct feedback, not only through the process, but at the tail end, and really, can a soldier apply this on a battlefield, and does it enhance their chance of mission success, I think is, like I said, the ultimate metric. That's going to be really hard to put specific metrics on. That's probably why I can't pinpoint specific things. There are things, and I hate process, although process is sometimes necessary. You know, one of the metrics that has been established is no more than 12 months to develop a requirements document. And that was a process that took anywhere between 3 to 5 years just a year ago.
My last question, before I ask it, I'll say also that I share Mr. Russell's optimism for the Army Futures Command. My last question, I know, Mr. Secretary, that one of the criteria in terms of citing the command was that it be near a leading academic institution, leading commercial institutions, University of Texas. That's great. This committee in the recent NDAs have increased research and development programs that support the work being done at historically black colleges and universities. So it's maybe half question, half comment. I would hope that you would look to the historically black colleges, at least in Texas, Texas Southern, which is in Houston, Prairie View, to develop partnerships with those institutions, as well as you sort of building out your ecosystem of innovative and diverse views on how to, you know, bring value to the warfighter.
Yes, sir, we will.
And thank you, Congressman Brown. We now proceed to Congressman General Trent Kelley of Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General Murray and Secretary McCarthy, or Undersecretary. We really appreciate y'all being here, and I appreciate the time you spent with me in my office prior to this. And one of my greatest concerns that you're addressing, and I'm a huge fan of doing this, is we've got a acquisition system that is set up for 40 or 50 years ago, and we expect it to work today. And today, technology moves in minutes, in weeks and months at the slowest. And we've got an acquisition system that is built for decades or quarter centuries. And so I appreciate this undertaking. I think we have to be careful, and people are always resistant to change. I think we have the right people in the right places to do this. We rely on you to be honest brokers and to do this in the right way. There's going to be a lot of gnashing of the teeth, and we've never done this, and it'll never work, and you guys have gone through this before, so I think we have the right leadership team in place, both at your level and above your level, and then your peers, that we can do this. One of the things I kind of want to talk a little bit about is from the time I've been in the military almost 33 years ago, we've always had, our opponents have had better long-range artillery. They've had, they outdistanced us, or they had more guns, and there was a lot of different things. And I know that we're working on some of those solutions. And so General Murray or Mr. McCarthy, whichever one would like to answer this, tell me kind of what you're doing to address that, and what, not the obviously classified stuff, but tell me who you're working with and who are the key players in addressing this issue that has been a at least 33-year problem in our military.
Yes, sir. We have broken it down into the three bins that you'll be very familiar with. So from a strategic or a tactical fires perspective, we're going through basically a two-step upgrade to our current Paladin. We're going to the M109A7, which is a new chassis. And then the next step is coming very quickly. We call it the IRCA, so it's the extended range cannon artillery. So it's a different caliber. It's 58 caliber cannon. And we have already shot a ram round out of that tube and more than doubled the range of our current artillery. And the goal is to get that out even further. The next one is our operational fires. It's a new missile. We call it the Precision Strike Missile. It has a range of will have a range of approximately 499 kilometers, and it's only limited by the INF treaty. Our current missile that's replacing has a range of 350, so we're extending that by about 150 kilometers. And then for our our strategic fires, we're looking very hard in starting down the path of hypersonics, and then also looking at what we call the strategic long-range cannon, which conceivably could have a range of up to 1,000 nautical miles. So we're looking at across all the three echelons of fires. And then we're also, a more near-term thing we're doing is we are adding back in both cannon and rocket artillery into our formations. It's very graciously, we've been allowed to grow over the last 2 or 3 years, and a large piece of that growth is focused on artillery.
And one thing, I know both of you guys have led soldiers at all levels, and we as leaders sometimes think we have the best ideas. But you guys both know that a lot of times you don't tell them, you tell them the capabilities, or you tell them what you want, and you let them figure it out. And sometimes they surprise you with an answer that is much greater than anything you ever anticipated. I ask that you not lose that. And I ask that you also not lose the ability when you have something developed, but a different civilian organization maybe comes up with all the tech guys you're going to have around you with a better idea. Let's not be immune from just saying, we're breaking this other one. This is better. It's ready to field. Let's do this. So I hope you'll do that. My final concern a little bit is we have some places like ERDIC, which do some of our greatest research in the world. And so there's a little bit of fear that some of that money is going to go to Futures Command, and they're going to be shorting on their budget some of the greatest research and doctors and people that we have. What can you tell me, or why should these people not be worried about maybe losing their budget and it going to Futures Command and them losing their budget? What would you do to make sure they understand that's not going to happen?
Sorry, I would say that the effort in all the labs across the Army is to get them focused on Army priorities. It's not to cut workforce, it's not to take money, it's to streamline and focus on what's most important to the Army, and that's what we have basically failed to do, in my opinion, since the mid-'80s. So, the labs, and you're right, the labs do incredible work, and we got some incredibly bright people. I think the value of Futures Command is we don't have all the really incredibly bright people, to go back to points you made earlier. So I think we can learn a lot. And it's not designed to cut away work from the labs or to take people from the labs. It's to learn from other really bright engineers, scientists, data scientists, et cetera.
And just very briefly, Chairman, it's not just having the right idea. Sometimes it's reinforcing and patting guys on the back and letting them know they're going to be okay. And you have to do that part. That's part of leadership and change. People don't like change. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Kelley. We now proceed to Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy of Florida.
Thank you. Secretary McCarthy, General Murray, thank you for being here today. And Secretary McCarthy, it's nice to see you again. I was really encouraged by the comments in your written testimony and what you said here today, that the Army must generate a culture that embraces and embodies agility in the pace of the private sector. And to do so, the Army must tap into the spirit of American entrepreneurship by operating in innovative hubs and academic institutions in our country. And that's why I'm just so pleased that the Army selected Orlando as the new location for the synthetic training environment cross-functional team under Army Futures Command. And as you know, the STE-CFT will merge live, virtual, and gaming domains into a single state-of-the-art training environment for soldiers. And my district in Central Florida is really ideal for this kind of work. Orlando is the center of gravity for gaming. It's home to a thriving tech ecosystem and has a dynamic and diverse higher education system. Just a couple of questions, and I'll toss them all out at once. Would you describe the benefit that the Army will receive by locating the STE, CFT, and other CFTs in and around innovation hubs in the United States? How do you envision that the CFTs will interact with these hubs and academic institutions and the overall Army Futures Command headquarters, as well as what can we do here in Congress to support the success of these entities?
I think we can probably both comment on this, ma'am. We're tapping into commercial talent that we have not utilized in recent times. So that's the first thing, and being closer to the innovators and allowing us to talk through our challenges helps us create solutions faster and more effectively. So we're trying to get as close as we can. I think it's the Allen curve of the 1970s, bringing the innovator closer to the customer ultimately, and you can talk through all of the requirements, to General Murray's points earlier about the development of a requirements document. So we're excited about that opportunity in particular with Orlando, and over time it's a cultural change for us. We're putting the requirements leader right in there with the PEO STRI organization, but it's improved our definition of requirements and the movement of information like we've illustrated before.
Yes, ma'am. I think you've heard over and over again about how we believe the real power of different ideas sitting around the table and talking really from different perspectives, how you come to a better solution. Entrepreneurs, private industry, big business, small business, we just see them as another valuable team member that we can absolutely learn from and come up with better solutions because of it.
Great, thank you. And then what do you think the new command's role will be in training and sustainment for future Army systems?
So sustainment is part of every requirements document, and Army Material Command will maintain a leading role in helping us develop, as part of the requirements document, the sustainability we're looking for, the operational readiness that we're looking for. The training piece of it will belong to TRADOC, where it traditionally belongs. So as we hand over material solutions or new concepts, they will develop the training strategy to go with it, and then FORCECOM will actually execute the training.
Thank you, sir. I'll yield back the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Murphy. We now proceed to Congresswoman Vicki Hartzler of Missouri.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. This is very, very exciting and has so much potential. And I just am trying to hone in a little bit in how this all ties together. And I appreciated your explanation, General Murray, earlier of how you're going to have, your job is to take the concepts and then come up with the material solutions and then pass that off to material acquisitions and then pass the training materials off to TRADOC. Can you just expound on that a little bit and what your role is and then how it ties in with the other divisions in the Army and their responsibilities?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So you basically read it back to me. So, Army Material Command 6 months ago did all the logistics and sustainment for a 1.1 million man Army. They do all the foreign military sales work, and they were doing research and development and S&T 6 months ago. Training and Doctrine Command does accessions, they do initial entry training, they do advanced individual training, they do officer education, they do non-commissioned officer education, and they produce the Army's doctrine. And FORSCOM is probably the easiest to explain. They have all their operational units, and they focus solely on the readiness of those operational units. And that's part of the streamlining, and it was identified before as creating another bureaucracy. I actually see it as streamlining the bureaucracy, because if you look at, and nothing against my fellow four-stars, but there is bureaucracy in AMC, and there's bureaucracy in TRADOC, and there's bureaucracy in HQDA, the Headquarters Department of the Army, and there is bureaucracy within the acquisition community. All four of those communities all had no vote. Very few people had a yes vote. So what I see this is really taking those four communities, when you look at the acquisition of material, the development requirements and acquisition of material, by establishing oversight, not authority, Chris, to all that, is you have actually streamlined four bureaucracies into one. And there is somebody in place that can say yes.
So how will what you do differ from what DARPA is doing?
So parts of what we do will be similar to DARPA. DARPA will be one of our key partners. DARPA is one of our key partners right now. We fund a lot of the work that DARPA does through the Army, and we will continue to do that. So the goal would be not to duplicate the efforts that DARPA is doing, but to have the synergy with DARPA to achieve the same result I've talked about earlier, delivering capability as quickly as we can.
So we have Dr. Jetty now, the Assistant Secretary of Army of Acquisition Logistics Technology. What is his role versus your role?
So he remains, his role has not changed. Since the day he was sworn in to today, his role has not changed. So he remains solely responsible to the Secretary of the Army for acquisition, logistics, and technologies. He's the Army's chief scientist. PMs, he's responsible for the development of the acquisition core, both the uniform and the civilian part of it. And he's ultimately responsible for the delivery of a material solution once a decision is made to go down that route, that it can't be solved by anything else, can't be solved by a doctrine change or an organizational change. I will have to work very closely with Dr. Jetty, and like I said earlier, I have oversight. We're building systems right now to give me oversight of the entire system. So if it's a problem prior to milestone decision authority or a material development decision, usually associated with milestone A, I have the authorities to fix that because it's a requirements issue, or it's a prototyping issue, or it's an experimentation issue. If it's past the decision to build a piece of equipment to solve that problem, the responsibility really lies with Dr. Jetty, so I have the obligation to work with him to solve those problems.
So it'll start with you. You mentioned hypersonics. So are you taking over the development of hypersonics and the research on that?
Up until the point that we decide to build it, yes, ma'am.
So who is working on that now, and you're going to take that responsibility?
Well, currently the limited amount of work we're doing, which is expanding, is being done at a place called SMDC, the Space and Missile Defense Command.
So you will be taking that over under your command and your development, your concept stage. What other projects will you be assuming that are currently somewhere else?
So all the CFTs work, there's about 21 individual programs that are within the CMTs, so future vertical lift, so future helicopters. The network, some of the work that's going up at Aberdeen Proving Ground, the assured position navigation timing, the air and missile defense portfolio, the soldier lethality portfolio, so next generation rifle, next generation automatic rifle, next generation night vision devices, the synthetic training environment that was mentioned, directed energy, the hypersonics we mentioned, and we are in the process of standing up an artificial intelligence task force, so machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Got a big portfolio. Yes, thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Hartzler. We now proceed to Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. As you're looking at what the Futures Command is taking on, how are you assessing the personnel needs, what skills, educational background, and experience that you'll need to bring these teams together, and where do you plan to build them from?
I'm relying pretty heavily on the gentleman sitting to my right. So this will be a very non-traditional, and I like to tell people I walked into, I think, my first meeting here in Crystal City because of the status of the headquarters down there, and I was very comfortable because there was a lieutenant colonel wearing a combat infantryman's badge and a ranger tab. And then I quickly found out that he's a operational research specialist with a PhD in data analytics. So that's the type of skill set we're looking for. We were very close to hiring a chief technology officer that Mr. McCarthy can talk about, but he is a leader in the field. I'm experts in the area of artificial intelligence, machine learning. So this will be a very non-traditional to what I'm used to walking into. And if I've been successful in my career, it's because I think I've been fairly successful finding the people with the right talents to surround myself with that can help me make the right decisions over time.
If I could expound on that, ma'am. So if you look at the three major pillars that make up the command, futures and concepts, combat development, combat systems, futures and concepts is kind of where you look at the skill sets of the skunk works and net assessment, which we have in the department. We need to be thinking about our operational design in future years, as well as leaders that understand future technologies. So being in the proximity of an ecosystem filled with entrepreneurs, we look to either hire these folks organically or as a consultant basis to help us understand what technologies are out there that could affect our operating concept to make us more lethal. So those will be research scientists, people of that nature. The combat development, to the point that General Murray made before about a chief technology officer, we are recruiting a dean of a very prestigious engineering school to be his chief technology officer, so have someone who's world-class in systems engineering to help us look at our architectural designs, because like the programs I mentioned before, future combat systems and others, a lot of that was the systems architecture associated with the weapon system. So if it wasn't clean on the operating concept and we didn't have a clean architectural design, that's why we had catastrophic failures. A lot of this talent had been divested from the department over the last couple decades, so we're out recruiting people with those types of skill sets. And to General Murray's, one of his primary tasks of building this technical bench, as well as world-class warfighters like the ones he's got in his senior leadership team.
Ma'am, if I could just add real quick, part of this also is harnessing the talent we already have. So identifying and harnessing talent that exists in a lot of the organizations that will fall under me pretty soon.
Are you looking at all in the Guard and Reserve and folks who may be doing this job already in their civilian sector?
I have a good tie into the Army National Guard, and I have a one-star general officer that's really a direct liaison to the entire department in the National Guard. And then in direct support to me is an organization called the 75th Innovation Command out of Houston, Texas. It used to be the 75th Training Command. And I've met with the two-star commander that is in direct support to me, and he has some amazing talent that he's harnessing all over the country.
A couple of the officers that are going to serve on our Artificial Intelligence Task Force are coming from the reserves. They're really going to be the nucleus of that organization in particular.
And then my last question is just about the technical oversight for your command in making sure that the investments that are being made are actually achieving realistic goals and objectives and realistic timelines, the things that you're setting out as are very clearly your objectives. Where will that kind of technical oversight come from?
Primarily from the chief technical officer and the resources I align with him. So, you know, before you establish a timeline, it's good to have a good understanding of what is reasonable. And be honest with you, I can't do that by myself. So it's really the people I hire, the people I surround myself with, get multiple opinions from outside agencies, independent assessments before we launch down a path to where we're committing resources against something we can't achieve.
Thank you.
And thank you, Congresswoman Gabbard. We now proceed to Congressman Subcommittee Chairman Mike Rogers of Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here and for your service to our country. While I was disappointed Huntsville was not selected, I don't know that much about Austin, but I'm sure it's a fine, innovative community. But I'm real interested, I'm still trying to understand mechanically how you plug into that ecosystem that you made reference to, Ms. Secretary, and how they interact with this new command. Can you tell me more about that? You know, I understand the public-private partnership dynamic that we employ in the depot systems, for example. How do you interact with these innovators that you have located nearby?
So, sir, there is, and Austin is just one example of hopefully will become a lot. You've heard of the organization formerly called DIUX, now called DIU, no longer experimental. Air Force has a similar organization called AFWorks. I'm standing up a thing called the Army Application Lab, which is a very similar concept to DIU and AFWorks. They will actually be co-located in a place called the Capitol Factory in Austin. It's completely contrary to anything I've experienced in my military career, but it basically is an accelerator hub where young innovators bring ideas and they match up with venture capitalists. And we will be in there scouting and researching technologies, potential technologies that we may want to accelerate or bring into one of our programs of record. And that's just, I mean, those exist all over the country. And so ultimately, as I said in my opening statement, the goal would be to reach out primarily through the 75th Innovation Command to get into these types of things and bring us things we would not normally experience if we were sitting on a military installation someplace.
I heard you make reference to the fact y'all will be working on directed energy. I'm very interested and excited about this capability and seeing us be able to employ it in more ways. But I've been frustrated that we're doing this research and development across several offices rather than concentrating in one area. So I've talked with Secretary Mattis about it, Mike Griffin, and both have indicated they intend to centralize that. But it sounds like that we're going the other direction. Is what you're going to be doing inconsistent with that centralization of effort?
Sir, if I may, like hypersonics, the department's looking at a similar type of joint interest program, not a joint program office like the F-35 or some of these other programs, but joint interests. So we work on programmatic timelines that are suitable for us to implement these capabilities into our formations, but we share the information and we establish nodes where we can work better together as really cultivate a supply chain to support these efforts, because there's only a handful of companies at present that are really expressing interest to work with us on this. So I think you'll probably see a similar effort like we are doing with hypersonics today, sir.
All right. Thank you all. Appreciate your service, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you, Congressman Rogers, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. And also, I want to thank, of course, Tom Hawley for his leadership on maintaining the 5-minute rule. And of course, we want to appreciate again our ranking member, Madeleine Badallo, for her bipartisan leadership on behalf of national security, a proven record, as she is certainly such a promoter of the strategic location of Guam and the beautiful beaches of Guam for tourism that has been, I don't want Tulsi to hear this, but Hawaii copied Guam. And so we're very, and it's...
Mr. Chairman, I object.
Hey, it's also been a great honor for the subcommittee today to meet in the Sam Johnson room of the Rayburn House Office Building. Congressman Johnson is a beloved member of Congress, but he is a hero, having survived as a POW of Vietnam, a person that we all we're humbled to be in his presence anytime. And so with this, we are adjourned.